it was fine, and then.
Yeah, I thought.
I think different options.
25, but it's coming down.
Okay.
Memberships.
Okay, so it's 5 o'clock, so we're gonna call this regular meeting, no, this workshop of council to order. And so I will need Monday, May 15th. Welcome to the public who joined us and staff. And I need a motion to adopt the council workshop agenda, moved by Councillor Back, seconded by Councillor Hanson. All those in favor, opposed, motion carried. Mayor Little is away in Ottawa with the mayors, and so good luck, mayors. And we have no minutes for adoption. The first report is the transportation discussion. So we have a good 2 hours. And I know Mr. Joyce is going to be starting off. And first, maybe you could introduce the new guy to your
Well, before I
left.
do that, acting mayor, Mr. Stewart, I believe.
He's zooming in.
He is zooming in, so
Yeah.
we should make that clear. He is.
Yeah, Mr. Stewart is
remote.
joining us remotely, yeah. And
We have Mr. Cohen here doing the presentation tonight. Council has seen that. Peter, if you want to introduce your team.
Yeah, sure. So to the left of Gavin, we have Matt Fitzgerald, who is our transportation planner.
new guy.
That's
New.
right.
Welcome,
And to his left, you're familiar with Steve Carney, but
the old guy.
he's now in a new role. He's now overseeing our regional transportation section as well.
Okay. Okay, and the heat is going up.
Yeah, Drew's coming up to look, facilities is coming up to look at the heat. Because I got the hot corner over here for 2 reasons, not just the heat. But it's blaring down on my head right now. So.
Okay,
No, I think with Jack, we'll see. Hopefully Drew's up here shortly.
okay,
Your worship, we could jump right in.
Yeah.
I will just say for council, we do this workshop a couple of times a year. The councilors that know that, it's an opportunity for us to engage with council, touch base about with our programs and where we're at, and to hear from you about whether you're still following through on your priorities and where we're at with a certain. So feel free, questions. I know Peter structured this. There's lots of involvement from council. We'll take stuff away and we'll come back as we typically do on this type of workshop.
and I think we also want to like go along sort of with the structured presentation, but we also want to talk about some other issues as well, like congestion in the cove, for instance, Edgemonte issues, that kind of thing. So we just want to spend a good 2 hours talking about all sorts of things, transportation, right? Good. Okay,
We are. Give me 2 seconds just while I get the presentation. Here, Genevieve.
Genevieve, you got it?
Yeah, your worship,
Yes?
your worship, I just want to apologize. I don't have a jacket on, but I don't have air conditioning in my house. And when I
Okay,
got
so
my-
we're just not gonna keep a visual of you, Dave. I don't wanna know anything other than you don't have a jacket on, thank you. And we're just gonna listen to you, hopefully come in, which is good with the rest of us.
You
Although
know-
we may be taking off our jackets because it's a bit of a sauna in here right now.
Yeah, mine's the same way. And it's, when I got in my car this afternoon, 97 degrees.
Yeah, nice. Jordan's jacket's coming off now. Okay. Okay, are you ready, Mr. Cohen? Oh, we're not ready.
I'm gonna do that to music, but what's that? That's downhill.
We're almost there, folks. Okay,
Perfect. Here we go. Okay, so double check that I can.
So I'll have to advance for you.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Okay. Okay, so good evening, council. Thanks for setting aside some time for us to talk about our transportation workshop and this discussion. So this evening, we're really going to be talking about what we're showing here in the green about our neighbourhood transportation area. And so there's 3 topics we'll be speaking about this evening. The first one is on pedestrian safety. The second area is on cycling safety, and the third section is on road safety and the projects and programs that fit up that portfolio that relate to neighbourhood transportation. As I'm sure you can appreciate, 2 hours isn't a lot to talk about our whole transportation program. We want to make the most of this time. So that's why we're focused just on the neighborhood transportation elements. What you have here in blue is kind of the balance of our transportation portfolio, plus a few other things as well. So like parking, traffic operations, regional transportation. We know that there are also important priorities under the transportation umbrella. And throughout this year, we're planning to do updates. For example, on the parking, we're currently doing a deep code parking review. There'll be an update to council later in this year as it relates to the parking element of that. Traffic operations, we'll put together a council information report. This is more just our day-to-day operations of our traffic infrastructure. And then on regional transportation, in Steve in his new role, there's a lot of great ongoing conversations right now. And we think later this year would be a better opportunity for us to provide an update on those elements as well. Next slide, please. So just before we get into our first topic, I just kind of want to walk you through a little bit of the structure of this evening. So for each of those 3 topics, I'll be presenting about 4 or 5 slides just to initiate the discussion. That'll probably take 5 or 6 minutes. We'll then pause and then we can talk for about half an hour for that discussion. So hopefully plenty of time for council to provide your inputs and feedback in terms of what we're going to be discussing. I'll then go to topic 2 for a few minutes, back to council, et cetera, et cetera. Under each topic, there's really 4 key questions or 4 key updates we'll be sharing. The first area is, what have we been doing over the past few years? The second area is, what are we planning to do over the next 4 to 5 years? The third piece is, from a staff's perspective, what do we see as some of the current challenges and observations we have with some of these programs? And then lastly, in responding to some of those challenges, what are some ideas that we want to be exploring? And that's really the focus of today's workshop, and really exploring anything that we're throwing up on the wall as just early concepts. Do they resonate well with council? And if they do, if we can gauge your interest in terms of saying that seems like a good idea, we can go away, further bake that, and then come back to a regular council session where it can be considered and formally adopted if there's sufficient support for a particular initiative. So I kind of want to walk you specifically through the structure for this evening.
Peter, just a sec. Bethany, do you have a clarifying question on the structure?
I just wonder in this workshop, we're not discussing neighborhood congestion or roads for automobiles. Are we bringing that back for another session?
Yeah, so as it relates to congestion, that's a previous slide. Regional transportation is probably the area, anything to do with the highway congestion and the likes as well. We're more than happy to discuss congestion based on your specific question when it comes time for that discussion. And if that's related to what we're presenting, say, for example, road safety, we can certainly go into that question. Otherwise, we can take those questions away as well.
Those questions are going to come up in regards to congestion and maybe not just on Highway 1, but in other areas,
Absolutely.
given recent experiences.
Yeah.
So, okay, thank you, Betty. Carry on.
Yeah, no worries. So I'll jump to the next slide, please. So before we go into our first topic, and I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but I think it's really important to share that over the last number of years, there is a number of policies and as well as plans that have been defined and decided by council for staff to go away and deliver a number of these action pieces. On the left-hand side, you see our OCP action plan that was adopted less than a couple of years ago. On the right-hand side, you see a whole bunch of policies and plans and workshops that we've been doing. We just simply don't have enough time to go into the details on that. But I think it's really important to share that we do have some guidance from council, and we will continue to have guidance from council as it relates to our transportation portfolio as well. Next slide, thanks. So let's jump straight into our first topic, which is in relation to pedestrian safety. Next slide, thanks. So the first element of our pedestrian safety program I want to touch on is our Safe Routes to School. And so this is a program that looks at 10 different schools across the district. And currently we are 82% complete through this program. And this is a pretty broad spectrum in terms of what improvements do we have within about an 800-meter distance from a particular school. And so they could be as simple as vegetation or landscaping trimming that's obscuring some sight lines. It could be improved signs and line marking. It could be improvements to the 30-kilometer speed zone around a school, or it could be some localized intersection improvements as well. Across these 10 different schools, the individual projects are in their dozens. There's many and many of them that are identified. But just to kind of reiterate, we're currently 82% through this current program. Next slide there, please. Thank you. Complementary to our Safe Routes to School program, we also deliver a number of additional active transportation projects across the district. This image here is giving you an overview of what we've achieved over the last 5 years. What you see in orange relates to our sidewalk projects that have been completed. You've obviously got a list on the top right-hand side as well. We also do a number of pedestrian improvements, and some of these, for example, are crosswalks. And so what's shown in green on the image represents some of those additional pedestrian improvements that we also do here in the district. Just to give you a general representation, if I talk about the sidewalk program, we probably have capacity and funding right now on an annual basis to deliver about a half a dozen blocks of sidewalk, plus or minus. So in terms of thinking about, how long it's going to take potentially for sidewalks to come on most of our streets, you're looking at multiple generations based on the existing investment levels that we currently have for our sidewalk program. Next slide, please. So that was looking in the past, and now we're looking at, what are we planning to do over the course of the next 4 to 5 years? And so we have two main areas that we focus on as it relates to our pedestrian safety program. On the upper left-hand side, you can see our annual programs. The budget of that collectively is just under $1 million every year, and that looks at things like hedge and vegetation trimming, pedestrian crossing improvements, general road safety, making our transit stops more accessible, better wayfinding, as well as some data collection as well. So that happens every single year. We also have distinct and individual projects as well. So what you have there on the list there, some sidewalk projects that were proposed for 3 neighborhoods in the district over the next 5 years. The Pemberton Heights project is a sidewalk project that's identified in the map shown in green. We're planning to construct that this summer. The other 2 projects in the Norgate and Deep Cove neighborhoods, we have not completed our engagement with the community yet, so we have not finalized what that scope looks like. Those 3 projects together come to around a $5 million investment over the course of the next 5 years. I do want to briefly touch on Norgate because it has already gone out to the community for a discussion initially. And basically what we were hearing back from the community was that what we were proposing to construct didn't necessarily reflect what they were seeing on site. One of the challenges we saw with that was in relation to our pedestrian master plan, and I will touch on that very specific issue and what we're proposing to modify, but hopefully better response to some of the feedback we heard from the Norgate community as well. Next slide, please. So what are some current observations that we see here from a staff's perspective on our various pedestrian safety program items? The first one, safe routes to school, generally speaking, really well received. We work with a number of different stakeholders, and generally when we're talking about improving safety around schools, it's generally received quite well, and we can deliver those quite productively. When we look at other pedestrian safety projects, so sidewalks and crosswalks and the likes as well, the level of support really varies project by project and neighborhood by neighborhood. One of the areas that we currently see a bit of a challenge, again, I'll talk about in just a second, is the current way in which our pedestrian master plan prioritizes our investment and scoping for sidewalk projects. I'll park that for a moment because we'll talk about it in a lot more detail in just a second. The last 2 items here as well is that quite frequently we come across encroachment issues, so mostly resident landscaping that's within the district right of way. So when we think about wanting to, say, deliver a sidewalk project, we're dealing with this on a case-by-case basis on that particular encroachment. And that could modify level of support, and it could certainly slow us down in trying to deliver these projects too. The last bullet there as well, we've also heard from some residents that they'd like more opportunities to be providing their input and feedback before we finalise our scope on our pedestrian sidewalk network upgrades. So this is what we're seeing from a staff perspective. Hopefully it resonates with council in terms of what you're hearing from the community. Taking all of that and into the next slide, here's 3 things that we want to be looking at in terms of some ideas and moving forward to really progress a lot of the work on our pedestrian safety program. The first one, as I said before, our Safe Routes to School program is almost complete, and we do not have a replacement program just yet for it. But given it's so positive, I think it would be a safe bet to make in terms of we'd like to look at an ongoing annual program that considers all of the schools in the district as well. One of the frameworks that Translink recently developed was their Travel Smart for Kids framework, which is looking at the ongoing safety program around schools. We think that will be a really good starting point for us because a lot of our regional partners across the municipalities in Lowman would probably also be looking to that as well to create some consistency. The second one is our pedestrian master plan. And so without going into too much detail on the pedestrian master plan, we can probably talk about that for a little while longer. The one specific challenge that staff do see is in how we prioritize our projects that get investment. So for example, we prioritize arterial streets, we then prioritize collector streets, we will then prioritize a second sidewalk on a collector street around a school, and then we'll put investment into a local street. So that prioritization between a collector and local, in some neighborhoods, it's really hard for the community to really figure out and understand what is the difference between a collector and a local street when they're looking at existing pedestrian movements. One of the pieces that we think would really help modernize our pedestrian master plan will be to look at creating some flexibility so that we can actually look at a school particularly, what are the current pedestrian movements? It may be a collector road, it may be a local street, but what makes sense from an actual pedestrian flow perspective? The third item here is in the engagement. We've already started discussions with our communications team to really create a central resource that might talk about our pedestrian projects generally. But when we do come into, or we think we're going to come into a neighborhood or a sidewalk project, for example, we would actually open it up for potentially, several weeks for them to provide their inputs and feedbacks so that can actually help us earlier in our planning and design process to incorporate some of that feedback so that when we do come back with our final scope, it's met by the majority of the residents in that. There are three ideas that we wanted to throw up onto the screen here. That brings me to the end of our pedestrian safety initial introduction to it, and happy to take questions from council.
Okay. Can I just ask, just off the bat though, can you just give us a brief overview of what the Travel Smart for Kids program is?
Steve, I'll pass to you if you know anything in addition, but essentially what I understand from it, from our transportation demand management coordinator, is Translink's only just bringing that out right now in terms of looking at the various programs for behavior changes. It may also look at opportunities for how we might think about infrastructure around schools as well. It is very early days. We've only just received kind of the framework of the last few weeks. And so we certainly are exploring that further in terms of what does that mean for us here at the district.
Okay. Councillor Beck.
Thank you very much for the quick, the first part of the presentation. I like that. Lots to talk about, but in terms of just the recommendations there on your last slide, I want to commend staff for the work that we've done on safe routes to schools. I think it's great that we've reached a point where we're getting towards completion, and I'm interested in kind of how we evolve that now. Right around schools continue to be some pretty dangerous areas, pick up and drop off times, and we certainly heard from parents in different venues, and you can see it every day. So I'm interested if we would ever look at doing a bit more of a focus around school zones and like some different things that can be done. I know in the city of Vancouver, for instance, they're looking at car-free school zones and car-light school zones, and maybe we would test maybe something like that could be tested through this Travel Smart program. I'm not sure, but I still feel like there's more we can do, right around the schools themselves. Most recently, we talked to Councillor Ma and I attended a meeting at Cleveland School with Canyon Heights Elementary with a number of the parents there talking about some of the issues there. So that would just be my comment on that. In terms of the engagement, I really like the idea of this dashboard type concept, is what it sort of sounds like, where residents can provide their input. I'm very supportive of that. And then I had a comment about the pedestrian master plan, but I'll have to come back to that.
Okay. Councillor Ma and then Councillor Pope. I'll go to Mr. Joyce first.
My experience, Councillor Beck, it sort of goes and flows as parents go through different schools. We've got the walking school bus that's worked really well in the past because the parents at the school wanted that. And then we go to another school, and certainly more and more our schools were built, a lot of them 60s and 70s, where children walk to school. Now a lot of children get driven to school, even that are in the neighborhood. And so you have long wilding cul-de-sacs like Blue Ridge, which is impossible to get in and out, and you have a lot of people. So it's ideal for children to walk to school. But it's really truly a partnership between the parents, the school, and really council as well, and the engineering staff to make that work. And that's why it's somewhat goes in cycles.
Every school community is different, I guess.
Very much. And they have different desires and needs for it.
Yeah.
I think what Peter's aligning to is we've gone as far as we can in that, seeking council input. And this is the theme through this workshop, is more than the other divisions I have, transportation is really a partnership with council as your reflection of the community and what. And that's what we're trying to tease out EBD tonight, and what areas would be priorities and where we should preference.
I think the extra thing that you need to consider as well, and what's changed since those schools were built in the 1950s, some of the original ones, is that the catchments have changed. And that created literally chaos from the municipality's perspective when the provincial government said, oh, you can go to any school you want. So now we've got, we actually had a counselor years and years ago who had 5 daughters. They all went to different schools. And, so different, there's a lot of movement back and forth. And then we've got some schools like Andre Piolet, for instance, up at King's. They have a school bus that picks up in neighborhoods down single-family residential streets. Whole school buses. There's not sort of a central area where kids have to meet. They're picked up at their door. So that helps, but it also adds to challenges as well. So we have to look at this whole gamut. So Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Murray. Peter, thank you for the presentation. And I know we've talked recently about some projects, including the one in Permanent Heights. My family and I live. Just a couple of questions. And there's sidewalk programs, and then there's this safe, routes to school, but they're not really necessarily exclusive. Like there's common goals. And so my first question is, what's the key driver? Like what's driving and, giving, I guess, the priorities to sidewalks or to crosswalks, or, how does that all work? And then my second question is, you mentioned earlier about level, and, I'm experiencing firsthand some of the, feedback from communities might not necessarily match with some of our stated objectives, and I'm just wondering how we can deal with that, because the issues I'm hearing about is potentially, if we put in a sidewalk, especially across from a school, there might be some issues with also parking, and I'm just wondering how the district's planning on dealing with some of these things.
Right, any questions? I have a bad short-term memory. So in terms of the first question, certainly there is an overlap quite regularly between what we want to do for that supports our pedestrian master plan and what supports our safe routes to school. The reason why there's that overlap is that within the pedestrian master plan itself, it actually calls out schools being a priority over other areas. And so it certainly is complementary as opposed to being exclusive on those two pieces. And so that's kind of one of those things that, and anecdotally from staff's perspective, if we have limited resources and we want to be focusing our attention on where to put sidewalks, around schools kind of makes sense, because you want to have a safe spot for kids to be at school. The second question you had, in terms of some of the challenges we hear and the various trade-offs, the overall objective for all of our safe routes to school stuff and what we do around schools is safety. That is the primary driver. I know that there's many secondary issues, but what we're really trying to achieve is how do we make it more safe for kids to get picked up and dropped off around a school. We know that sometimes there's impact to existing parking conditions. There is impact to existing landscaping. We need to deal with that on a case-by-case basis. If there was a policy that we could kind of follow that, great, but we don't, so we have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis. And that does make our progression on some of these projects a little slower than potentially what started.
I can just thank you for that, because I fully support that safety is a priority. And in my opinion, the streets in front of our homes, of course, we'd love to park there, but sometimes there's other needs that the community wants for that roadway, and I think that's a priority. I think one thing that I'm going to keep in mind is, parking, trying to create safe sidewalks, and potentially how that will be impacted when we have short-term rentals and laneway houses. So that's something that is just in the back of my mind, because as we get more, improved intensification of roadways in local streets, those are all going to kind of come together.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it was more of a comment, but I'd be more than happy to add some extra layering. So in the next section on the cycling safety element, one of the key themes we hear from the community, we see from all of our engagement, is kind of competing interest between space for parking vehicles and space for moving people. We hear it consistently, and it's a real challenge for us to be figuring out, how do we take a priority over that if we're trying to it for everyone. And so there is a challenge because we have a limited right of way on that front as well. So just wanted to kind of also point that out, that we also see it on active transportation projects as well.
Councillor Pope.
Yeah, kind of picking up on that, and thanks very much for the presentation. It's interesting to see what you're doing. What is this all based on, safe routes to school? Like, nobody would ever be opposed to safe routes to school. But I have to say, in the many years that I was a reporter, more than probably 25. And the years since, I've never heard of one kid dying on a school, near a school because they were hit by a car. And I'm just very curious as to how we all went down the road of this policy in the first place.
Yeah, so I'm gonna hand over to Steve Carney if he's got anything to add to that question.
Thank you, Peter, and through your worship, yeah, we have had a couple of incidents involving school children. Thankfully, to my knowledge, no fatals, but I remember there was a boy hit on
Mount Royal. Mount Royal, well, there was one on Mount Royal.
yes, and one, yes, there was. There were 3 boys that were crossing Mount
Yeah.
Royal. There was discontinuity with the sidewalk and the crosswalk in the line, so that was sort of a one of the factors. Another one in Edgemont several years ago with a car turning around in a driveway. And,
Yeah,
so there have been some, I would call those close calls. I don't think they were serious injuries, but it's a real reminder, as to how important it is to provide a safe environment. It's especially in the immediate footprint of, elementary schools, for example, and high schools where we know there's lots of pedestrians. Like, there's some of the highest pedestrian generators across the district. I know I live near Argyle High School, and we're putting in a new crosswalk where we've counted 170 high school kids crossing during the lunch hour. And no crosswalk, no, real destruction of pedestrians. And so these are some of the things that we look to target when we, develop the program. Typically, the Safe Routes to Schools is, focus more on the elementary schools. But some of the other programs like the crosswalk upgrades and sidewalks, there is quite a lot of overlap, and we tend to look at the high schools closely when we are looking at the priorities, just because, again, like some of the pedestrian volumes are so high.
yeah, I know,
Arguably, high school students are often even more distracted than
yeah,
the elementary school. And of course, nobody would ever, one death or one injury is of course too much. But I was always just curious where that policy was based on. And I've always said that it's like the most dangerous time to be on the road is at 3 o'clock when parents are rushing to pick up their kids, and it can be quite a gong show.
Peter, did you have a comment about that?
The only thing to add to kind of what Steve was saying as well is under the umbrella of just general road safety, from a how do people get around, walking is a really small portion of that, but as it relates to serious injuries and the likes as well, very disproportionate share for pedestrians as well. So that's kind of an underlying thing that's significant. Yeah.
So on sort of the flip side of that, I really feel like we should be, our long-term vision should also be focusing on communicating to parents that it is a vastly healthier and a much better way to get to school if you walk. I think somehow we have to overcome this notion that's only evolved in the last 10 to 20 years that parents need to drive their kids to school when they're in elementary school. It's ridiculous. We should all be walking. We should be putting out major communications that encourages parents to do that, the reasons why. And of course, that has to flow with safety on the sidewalks. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as a seed to plant for the long term that I would really like to see happen. Riding to school, walking to school, these should all be the first course of action for parents. And of course, that would also eventually ease up some of the massive amount of congestion that is strictly due to parents ferrying kids back and forth from schools. The other question I had was about the $5 million investment, slide 15, over the next 5 years. And I was wondering where Edgemont Village is in that. Listing, Pemberton Heights, Norgate, Teton. Why isn't Edgemont in there?
So is that in relation to the 30-kilometer pilot, or?
I'm not sure. It's on your slide 15.
Yeah. Genevieve, just come back to the slide.
Oh, that's slide 15?
I think there's a couple.
Sidewalks.
Oh, it's on my page 15. Sorry.
It's the sidewalks.
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
What page is that, Herman?
It looks like
16.
There.
Oh, 16.
That's the sidewalks.
Yeah, so they're part of our 5-year plan. Pembroke Heights, Norgate, and Deep Cove are the neighborhoods we're looking to come to over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
That's to say that we have an ongoing sidewalk program. So we go from neighborhood to neighborhood and identifying and working with that community for those sites. So for the next 5 years, there are the 3 neighborhoods that we're seeing.
Yeah. But why isn't Adjournment in there?
We go through many neighborhoods. I don't know the last time we went into Edgemont. We might have to provide that update elsewhere, but
Those are
we-
just upcoming ones.
upcoming. It's not to say that we won't be looking at other neighborhoods, but in terms of what the next 3 years is, these are the 3 neighborhoods that we're coming to stand next on the list to go to.
And if there are, because I recently did a walk with some of the residents around Edgemont and also met with the Edgemont Business Association, and there's clearly some issues that are going on, as I mentioned in my follow-up letter, that, that need addressing. Some of them are safety issues. There's a daycare, the kids walk back and forth on, on a street where nobody stops at the street corner, even though there's a stop sign. And I was there and saw it. A guy actually ran the stop sign the day I was there. So what happens with those kinds of issues and how can they get prioritized?
So we get many of those. Like one of the themes you'll see probably in the road safety section is that the volume of requests that we get is very significant, and we have a very limited staff base to be able to work through a number of these issues. And so we have to look at where the historical data is putting us in terms of the number of collisions, if there's fatalities or serious injuries. We prioritize those. We know from discussions and feedback that we have from the community, they want to also explore outside of what the data is saying. I'm seeing this potential safety issue. I'll talk about that in the 3rd section in terms of what we're thinking of how can we probably respond to that need as well.
And I think we did, just on that, Catherine, we did pass a motion in regards to the 30K in Edgemont, and we did ask for consultation with staff to the Business Community Association, the Residents Community Association. Gavin?
There's always 2 ways to stack a direction. You have your 3 engineers here are going to look at traffic counts, accident records, the hard data that engineers look at. You're going to run through your programs when a traffic should go in, where a sidewalk would go in. Set that aside. And then there's the community input, comes through council, it comes through letters, it comes from people showing up council. And so there's 2 funnels that we gather that information that come in. Not one more than the other, but our work plans and what we drive on an annual basis comes from the data we analyze. And then there's a separate stream as people come in, they talk to you and others, and we get information that way as well.
So can you just comment on the timing of the Edgemont consultation with the Business Association out of the motion that we passed? When's that happening?
So I can speak to in terms of the pilot. So the 30-kilometer-hour signs went up last week.
Yeah.
Those signs be up there and collecting data throughout to see how that has made an impact to the Edgemont.
But there was more to that motion, which was to meet with the Business Association and the Edgemont Community Association to look at consultation on the whole area.
I'll have to just connect with the team and we'll provide an additional update as it relates to that piece.
That would be great. So now we're going to go to, thank you, Catherine. Now we're going to go to Mr. Stewart because he had his hand up as well. And then Councillor Hanson. And then we've got 2 more sections. So okay. So Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, there's just 2 comments I want to make. The provincial government's decision to allow you to access any school you want has had a profound impact on our transportation system. And I don't know what the solution is to that point, other than doing what we're doing, which is try to focus on the local areas. When I hear about the discussion around Edgemont, we have this constant conflict in terms of competing interests. And the transportation staff have to try to resolve that to a certain extent. We can probably easily increase the budget for a lot of this local stuff because it's no longer local. It's people moving all over the municipality. So what we probably need to do, and I'm sorry, I'm going to interject occasionally. We probably just need to do is increase our budget in terms of pedestrian safety and attack more of this stuff. And in the scheme of things, when you look at projects that are $100 million and $50 million, we could probably do more for local pedestrian safety by investing more every year. You look at those dollar values that are up in the screen right now, that looks like a lot, but in the scheme of
No, it
things,
doesn't. You don't think it looks like a lot, Dave?
Yeah, well, I don't either. So, but We just have to recognize that, forces outside of our control have made changes. And we've been probably a little tardy on reacting because we need to do all the consultation. And the fact of the matter is, when you're dealing with a local school principal, you're dealing with a local PAC, and you're dealing with local residents. They all have quite different interests in how we particularly address some of these issues. But there's no question that we probably need to invest more. But at some point, if we consult and forever, we'll get nothing done. At some point, we're going to have to say, no, pedestrian safety is really important. Kids' safety is really important. This is what we're doing. And that's going to upset some parents who want ease. And I understand that. I have 3 kids. I've raised, with my wife, 3 kids. But there's a certain point at which you have to say, you know what? If you want them to be safe, you can't drive like a mad bunch of crazy people into a cul-de-sac, dump them off in the middle of the street and hope like hell that's going to work. So those are the kind of conversations we need to have with the school district, because they're allowing their principals, in my opinion, to determine how this is all going to work. And they can't and they shouldn't. Our transportation professionals should be doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Councillor Hanson.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Thank everyone for their comments. Observation that I put forward is pedestrian safety. I mean, the pedestrians are as safe as drivers are slow. And the real issue, and I say this as a person where I have handled cases of serious injury, kids going to school, invariably it's people speeding. So have we considered expanding the notion of lower speed zones, either expanding them out from the school zones to lower speed zones, or expanding it potentially across the district with respect to the areas where pedestrians are most likely to be? And also coming back to the issue of enforcement, what are we going to do to slow down? There are a lot of cars significantly over the speed limit. They're the ones that are posing the real risk to pedestrians, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of enforcement. Those would be my comments.
Yeah, just to briefly talk to those comments, in our road safety section, the idea of, the areas we can go lower than 50 kilometers an hour, for example, or slow streets is what we've called them previously. We'll be touching on that later on in the road safety section. In terms of your enforcement piece, curbing driver behavior is certainly an effective tool when we have the resources available. You can imagine RCMP, the ones that can enforce usually. And so in terms of trying to vie for their very limited resources, that does become a challenge for us. So we're trying as staff to figuring out what are some other measures for us, and we're just going through that. Hopefully when we come back in a few weeks' time to talk about Delbrook, there might be some updates related to that.
I'll just follow up with that by saying, imagine a world where in those places where cars and pedestrians are likely to interact, our cars are going 30 kilometers and actually going 30 kilometers, we wouldn't have an issue of pedestrian safety. Cars and pedestrians wouldn't collide if the cars are going 30 kilometers. But they're colliding when they're going 60, 70, and even faster. And that distorts the pedestrian's perception, and it creates the hazard.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Councillor Forbes.
Just a quick question. I'm back on page 14 where you've got school program, and Canyon Heights is 63%. That's already been mentioned, but Lynn Valley is 57%. So the future work is going to be done in those two areas, because the 2 bottom, are they on your priority?
Yeah, so certainly is our plan to finish off the program. Some of the things that are left over may have a coordination element. Maybe there's a project already coming down, we're going to coordinate some of those improvements as well. There could also be some adjacent development bikes as well, again, coordinating with that as well. But the goal is to, generally speaking, to finish off this program in its full.
Well, I'm not so much speaking of finishing it off, as there's a couple of places that are really quite low compared to other ones, but I'm assuming the Lynn Valley one might be the one that Steve mentioned up by Argyle. If you consider these in Argyle, is that something that should be done?
It is going to be done, yes.
Soon?
That is on schedule for construction this year. Yes, that specific improvement wasn't identified in a Safe Routes to School study, but it is something that we're delivering through the pedestrian safety program. So again, quite a bit of overlap there.
Okay.
And really, it could fall into either category. It's just that's the one that's most appropriate in terms of for our funding. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Forbes. It's obvious, it's very evident that we have a lot to say about this kind of stuff because we're 45 minutes in. And I know we have 2 extra questions and I haven't even said anything yet. And we still have 2 more sections. So I know Mr. Stewart said that we can do another one of these. It's going to have to come back sooner because we do want to address this kind of stuff. And if we're going to increase those budgets to get more of this work done, we're going to want to talk about this later. So I'm just going to insert myself here. So you've talked about the 30-kilometer plot. I think Councillor Back said it at the very beginning that all of these schools are different and they all have different needs. And I think that's how we have to approach it. It cannot be this one size blanket fits all. It has to be, you go into an area, and I have been through this as a parent of 3 children at Seymour Heights, trying to figure out a way to deal with the traffic on Carnation Street in the Seymour. It's still not, it's still the same as it was when I started because there's no way to do it. And Mr. Joyce talks about that. All of these schools are very unique and the streets are very unique. And on Seymour Heights, for instance, you've got 3 trails with crosswalks that come from the trails to the sidewalk, and you have to have a space big enough on either side not to park a car. So you have limited parking, you have a regional need because the school supports a huge number of children with disabilities and autism. So there's a lot of kids coming from inside of the area. There's a bus stop there. There's a circular driveway that worked really good in the 1950s, but doesn't work very good now. And then there is the responsibility of all of us as drivers, and Councillor Hanson talked about this, and on the Mount Royal accident, I remember when that happened, the mayor went out, met with the neighborhood because the parents erupted, went out, was standing on Mount Royal in the morning at the crosswalk. Kids were walking and we were watching, we had staff out there, and a car blew right through the sidewalk as the mayor, 7 feet tall, is standing in the middle of the road and blew right through the intersection while kids were walking across the street. So it is the responsibility of those drivers. And I will say, I've seen it all. Minivans opening their doors in the middle of the road, run, kids jump in. It's astounding. It is astounding the behavior of drivers on the roads, and everybody's guilty of it. You know, we're always in a rush. It's very different. So I really think that it has to be a visit, and I've been to Canyon Heights, and you know, one really great example was we were talking about how to move the bus stop from in front of Canyon Heights away so we could put a pickup drop-off area right in front of the entrance to the school. And I had 7 foot tall Mr. Carney there. And he was explaining to me that we had to pace it off for a space big enough for the bus. And so we paced off every part of the street at Canyon Heights, and we never could achieve the distance for the bus. And then as we're standing there, a bus came up the road and parked between a circular driveway in front of a residence, and the bus actually extended into the driveway access because that's where it had always parked for the last 50 years of its route. And so because it was there, it was okay. But if we had to implement something new, it had to look at a different scope. And so you're always going to run into those anomalies in the municipality because of how we were built. We were not on a grid. Nothing is even, nothing is the same. Everything goes in a circle. It's like a snail, and it's a challenge, right? So it's so hot in here. It's like a freaking oven. Yeah, but fix it.
We are this is turned off now and there's some keeping.
Yeah, something's happening.
Corrected.
Anyway, I really do think that if we took an approach of looking at each individual school and what it needs, because some we can fix and some we can't. Hansworth right now, there's an area just off of where the old entrance used to be, across the street from Hansworth. And there were some side streets that were being used for parking, and they had time limited parking on them. But now with the new school, the entrance is on the opposite side of the property, but the signs on those streets haven't changed. They haven't moved to the other entrance. And so I've had residents call me saying, we still have this time limit of parking. No one's parking here because the entrance is down at the other end now and they don't park there. And yet we cannot park in front of our houses because we have these time limited signs. So I really think it's a very unique approach to each individual school. And I think we have to work with the PAC and we have to work with the school district and we have to work with the parents. And it's very true, it ebbs and flows. You know, sometimes there's active parents and sometimes there's not so many active. Okay, so I know we all have more questions.
I just have one quick.
No, I know, but
On the Hansford thing, I just.
but so does Counselor Back and so does Counselor Ma. Yeah, we have 3 really quick questions, but we have another hour. So we're gonna fit those really quick questions into the next section, but I do want you to get to the next section, so go.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll jump through. There we go. So the second topic we're going to be talking about is the cycling safety program. So for the next slide, please. So this image here is just to give you an overview of what is our current plan and program of work we're planning to do. There's 2 colors I really want to highlight here. The first color here in yellow, that indicates what is defined as council's priority routes. So that's really what we're taking as our marching order to move forward in building that backbone of a cycling network for the community, in connecting the town centres and connecting to regional parks and the bridgeheads and other key destinations as well. What you see in solid red relates to projects we've completed over the past 5 years. So examples include, the first phase of Lynn Valley Road and those active transportation improvements, and then also a number of upgrades in coordination with the Ministry of Transportation's Lower Lynn interchange improvements as well. Next slide, please. This slide here builds off the past slide and really gives an indication of what the next 4 to 5 year plan is for our cycling network expansion. Everything dashed in red is continuing to kind of connect all of our town centres. So some of the example projects include filling some gaps along Marine Drive at Main Street, as well as the Mountain Highway Corridor and phase 2 of our Lynn Valley Road active transportation improvements, where engagement starts tomorrow on that particular project. What you see in blue is just indicative. It's just to give you a representation that following our budget discussions with council earlier this year, the Spirit Trail extension from Maple Woods Deep Cove is seen as a priority. So over the next 4 to 5 years, we will find one route that gets you from Maple Woods Deep Cove. That is a very significant undertaking. I wanted to recognize that this may not necessarily be the final alignment or what it looks like, but just an indication that a big piece of our work program in the next 5 years is also to look at that in conjunction with continuing to connect all of our town centres as well. Next slide, please. So this is probably the slide I'll spend most time on the cycling program for this topic. So really what we're finding as staff, and this is probably something that you're also hearing from the community, is that we have a very clear vision in the OCP. We want to be connecting our town centres and we want to be connecting to key destinations, but implementing them is quite challenging. Gavin started to allude to this before. There's 4 key areas that we see very consistently coming up from whether it's discussion with council and the community, whether it's feedback through our project engagement processes as well. So the first area there is really, a desire to be creating dedicated space for cyclists, but also that competing interests of retaining some on-street parking. So that's kind of more of a space allocation issue. The second one here is a desire to be delivering quicker in line with our 2030 vision, as opposed to really slowing down, engaging more, and revisiting some of our options that we're developing. The third element here is that we do have a goal to be completing a minimum network, so that backbone network that I was just talking about before. But we also, without having that network, it is challenging sometimes for us to really prove what the existing ridership numbers are. The last item there as well is really to make cycling a competitive means of transportation. It's got to be having some direct linkages across our community. And given our topography, given our road network, we really don't have many options outside of our arterial network, which is already, moving a lot of people across different means. And so trying to find space for cyclists on those is also another challenge as well. The second and third item, so the second item here in the bullet point, our projects typically take, if we're doing a proper full scope project, takes around 3 years. So year 1 is planning and engagement. Year 2 is design and engagement and council discussions. And then year 3 is implementation. I'll be talking about timelines in just a second for one of the potential opportunities we're seeing that we can explore. And the last item here as well is that going through the budget process and trying to be a bit more fiscally constrained, we did identify a number of active transportation projects to progress through their planning and design, but some of the construction funding was put into a bucket and just allocated for priorities based on where some of these priorities were coming from. I'll talk to this for in just a second as well in terms of releasing some of that construction funding to what we are identifying as some top priorities. Next slide, please. Taking all of those items from the previous slide, we're seeing two opportunities here to help progress and deliver or think more about our cycling network as well. The first element here relates to what TransLink has recently released as their rapid implementation guidelines for cycling infrastructure. So this applies across the Lower Mainland for municipalities to consider. Effectively, what it's doing, it's what are some opportunities to deliver some cycling improvements quicker? How do we build the network also quicker, but also soften those impacts? And so, for example, we may come with you for a project in the past where we have no facility, and then we go to saying, okay, we want to be putting concrete in, removing out parking. It's quite a spectrum in terms of what's there today and what we're planning to do from a project. The rapid implementation looks at things that are kind of like that midpoint, just bollards, line marking, signage, localized improvements, a lower investment, easier to implement solution. So it may not be the most comfortable facility that we really want to get to. That's a long-term vision, but it improves on what's there today to make it a more comfortable facility as well. We see some examples, in completing that connection between Edgemoor and Lionsgate, there may be an opportunity for us to explore some rapid implementation opportunities there. The Mount Seymour Parkway facility, that's another example. We all know what the existing facility is today. It'd be quite challenging and expensive for us to do a really full-blown project there. But is there some examples like putting up some bollards as an example, as a rapid implementation piece? We've started to explore that as staff, and that kind of falls within this rapid implementation. We think also potentially some opportunities for the Spirit Trail extension as well, whether there's some lower investment, quicker to implement elements to that piece as well. The second piece here also talks to what we previously were discussing through the budget process of the deferred projects. So really referring to the construction funding being held just for the time being while we're kind of in our current economic times. We know our top 3 corridors for our cycling infrastructure is filling the gaps on Main Street, getting to the bridge, filling our gaps in Marine Drive and getting to the Lionsgate, and also connecting Lynn Valley Town Centre to Lynn Creek Town Centre. What that looks like, that's still being done as part of our engagement process right now. But we know those 3 corridors are the top priorities for us in starting to build out our network. We have sufficient funds available in our budget. And so in terms of how we're progressing our work, we're going to, undefer, for want of a better expression, and approve the construction funding for those projects to proceed. A couple of those could start construction next year, and then Mountain Highway might be the year after there as well. So really trying to unlock some of that funding and progress some of those projects that we know are the priorities. Based on how we think about the rapid implementation, we could go further down that list based on the funding for all the other priorities that we have, but we just want to further explore kind of those low investment opportunities to see how far can we stretch our dollars based on the limited funding that we have. That was a very quick intro to cycling. I know that there's probably a lot of discussion, so I want to hand back to council for a discussion.
Just under, yes, Gavin?
Just can Peter flip back to that slide? Because that's really where I'd really like to tease out of council that one. Sorry, Acting Mayor.
So just on, as an example, Mount Seymour Parkway, and you talk about those, those advancements in trying to address something more quickly, because the full-blown perfect system is going to take a lot of money and forever. And I think there are ways to do that. And I always go back to Mount Seymour Parkway has 2 sidewalks on both sides for the majority of the parkway, from Riverside to Mount Seymour Road. There is a sidewalk on both sides of the street. And I would say very rarely is there's never a full stream of people on both sides of the street. Maybe from Parkgate to Mount Seymour Road, it's busier because of those apartments in there and people are walking to the mall. But from Riverside all the way down, there's a lot of space. And I can't help but wonder, if you look at the example that we used on between Old Dollarton and Mount Seymour Parkway and Riverside, that little connection on Riverside Drive, where we put delineators in there just because we wanted to separate. We had so much truck traffic going along Riverside. I mean, it's not pretty, but it freaking works, except for the odd bike rider that still rides on the road. And I roll down my window at the intersection and say, please ride on the delineators. We put it there for you. And they understand. But it really did work. So I have to ask myself, and I know we've got bus stops. I know that is a big issue, but it's really not. We can figure that out. But why don't we just pilot running delineators down one side of the parkway and use one side of the sidewalk for cyclists and the other side for pedestrians, the north side for the pedestrians and the south side for the cyclists. And, you know, you could allow a child to ride on a bike on the sidewalk and their dad or mom to ride on the bike lane with a set of delineators and make it feel a lot safer. I mean, that would be a game changer, right? And I know, like right now, if I got on a bike in Seymour from Riverside, I could ride through those trails and through those neighborhoods and get to the cove easily, right? But you know, it's a little bit different terrain when you get into the Blair, and you know, it's a little challenging coming out of the park on Mount Seymour Road, and then you got to weave into Hamber Place, et cetera, right? That more direct route that we're looking at for that more direct link, what would it cost to do? Just to run delineators down that transportation line and then pilot it for a year and just say this is non-pedestrian?
So staff have already explored it. It'd be a few $100,000 just to give you an order of magnitude.
It's for delineators. Seriously, we should get into the delineator business for a few $100,000.
But
Also screw them in the cement.
But staff are certainly looking at, it's a fairly similar concept, but we can certainly take that away and explore, you know, from a network perspective and from a safety perspective, how much room can we create as well through that approach as well. So we will certainly take that away as part of that process, but that all fits within the general notion of what can we implement quickly on potentially Mount Seymour Parkway as an example. And that feedback there is right in with kind of what staff are wanting to be looking into.
So if we could get that information back relatively quickly, because I think there is a lot there is already room there. There is already a bike lane there. There is already a sidewalk there, and lots of people ride on the sidewalk right now. Certainly going up Snake Hill, they ride on the sidewalk. They do not ride on the road, most people, because they feel safer on the sidewalk. But if you could just delineate that like Riverside Drive, I think it would just, you know, it would give us that breathing room to try to catch up. And, you know, it's not like you're taking away sidewalks for pedestrians, because there's a whole nother sidewalk and there's an intersection with a controlled crosswalk everywhere except between Broadview and Strathaven. There's not. So, you know, people would just have to walk another block to be able to cross. But everywhere else, there is an intersection with a controlled light. And I just really think we have a solution, and then it can connect into Mount Seymour Road, and then you could go down, you know, by Amber or by St. Pius, and you could connect into Deep Cove. So I really think that we should look at that as a solution. Mr. Stewart, you have your hand up, and then I'll go to council.
Yeah, I just, you know, at the end of this conversation, we just need some courage from council. I can't say any more about that. We're never going to get it perfect. There's always going to be the detractors, but at the end of the day, we could do a lot more. And I mean, this, if we were to implement all of this in the most perfect way, and I don't know, Peter could correct me, it would be $300 or $400 million. I got to be honest.
Yeah.
And instead, what we need to do is just say, we're going to take a chance, and it's not going to be perfect, and we're just going to be able to willingly take a political challenge to say, the only way we're going to get cycling safety improved is we try things on for size. And I know that's not what local government likes to do. That's risk. That's very, very risky. But I really do feel at this point, if we want to move this agenda, we're gonna have to wing it a little bit and not spend a year doing consultation. We're gonna have to spend a lot less time and say, you know what, we can try this. Let's try it, see if it works. And that's the only way you're gonna move this agenda forward. Because my experience is, when I look at the last 5 or 10 years, 20 years, you know, it's 15 different studies, 15 different engineering observations, and somebody in the cycling community says, you know, the delineators are not good enough. We say, okay, well then we do nothing. And I would rather do something, but I'm just saying this personally. Staff need council's courage to just say, you know what, if we really believe in cycling, and we're gonna take some risks to do it. And
Thank you.
If it works. Thank you.
I think a really good example is Jones Avenue at Mahan, where the city just extended the sidewalk and turned it into like a paved rolling multi-use path and kept the parking in order to be able to connect that. It's not perfect, But it was something that was added on to existing infrastructure and it works really well. I think the city of North Vancouver, they do some really big projects like down on Esplanade that are huge money, separated. It's a truck traffic route, so it has to be major. But on other side roads, they just try to, make existing infrastructure better and then they reclassify it. And I think it works really, really well. Councillor Back and then Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Councilor Mary. I do agree with the comments that I just heard. I think we take way too much time consulting on things where, direction has been given by the community through things like our OCP and the action plan and all the various other policies that we have around these issues. And I think we're never going to make the kind of progress that we need to make in terms of active transportation. When we're taking 2 steps forward and taking 1 step back, we need to commit to these things. So I appreciate Mr. Stewart's comments. I totally agree. I think we need to try some things. I know as local governments, we tend not to try things. And I think, pilot projects make a lot of sense. So things like the Consumer Parkway, I would fully support, putting some delineators there and trying out this, this rapid implementation guidelines. Talk about the city of North Vancouver. I was just riding along West First on the weekend, and I know that was done pretty quickly. The whole area along West First in front of the Rona, and it's what you can do with precast concrete. You can do some of this stuff very quickly and be very effective as it is there. So my other comment was going to be around things like paving projects. And when we do paving projects, one specific example would be Highlands. Do we look at adding active transportation?
Well, we did that on 29th, and I don't want to bring that up as an example, but we're not going to be doing that again.
Mr. Stewart's comments, yes, we do. That's what it said. So in that one, and I think council knows, it was an opportunistic, but not one of our priorities.
Yeah.
Right. So, that we're suggesting here, we focus on those priorities or where we know we're going to get supported. Well, I've got the floor if I might. All your plans, when I look at all the plans that we do, when you think about it, Councillor Hanson, I remember he used this phrase a couple of years ago, self-select on the surveys. We get great support, whether it be transportation plans or any plans that we do. But when it comes to the implementation, we have to get on the street and actually fulfill those plans. That's when we start to struggle. And then you have people coming in to talk to council, and then it's back to the engineering group. We look at it, we do what engineers do. We try to fix it and solve it, and then it comes back again. Do it. But initially we have those big plans where all heavy lifting is done and you have those. That was our first slide tonight. All those plans are there. But it's when we go out and we say we're going to put a bike lane on street X. That's when we seem to redo that cycle again. And I think that's where you hear from Peter and the CAO earlier was, are we going to commit to that? And are we going to go forward with that? And you're going to put up with a little bit of noise. Or can we do that and get some of this done for these 3 guys in the next little while?
I'll tell you just a little quick example. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So I think we are looking at those paving projects. We should be looking at active transportation. It only makes sense when, even on 29th, sure, I don't want to go through what we went through, but I think in hindsight, it still makes sense when you look at what the active transportation component of that project cost versus the entire project. So if we're not looking at, putting bike lanes wherever we can with these paving projects, then I think it's really a missed opportunity. And the final comment will just be on Delbrook. I know hopefully we'll get an update on what's happening there, but there's an example where I know Mr. Barzil is here tonight. He's certainly been advocating for years on those improvements, and it's just it's so long to get any kind of progress there. So interested to hear where we're at on that.
I think a good example of council making decisions that were very controversial years ago, Gavin, in Seymour Heights, Blue Ridge. Riverside Drive, but we also took by Blue Ridge Elementary School, we wanted to put a sidewalk in, and it was going to take a significant amount of frontage from some single family homes. And it was a significant amount of infrastructure that they had built on the boulevard that they had looked after. And we had to take it because we needed to have a direct sidewalk to that school. And we did, and it was bumpy. We've put speed bumps in before and we've taken them out, and because we've digressed back to the pressure, even though they were good decisions. And so it does take you have to go in with it understanding that it's going to be for the greater good. And sometimes it gets, challenging. Councillor Ma.
Yeah. Great discussion. Love it. Just responding to the point about, having some courage and by council and make some decision. I believe council did make a decision when we did the last budget. We took some money from artificial turfs and said, look, we want this for active transportation. So I think we have made that a priority. And if you want to take away from tonight, the three priority routes that you talked about, Main Street, Lions Gate, and Mountain Highway. You know, I support those. You know, they're parts of it, but I can see them filling out to that, you know, a little network that you're talking about. One thing that I see an opportunity, you know, engineers want to fix things. Us marketers want to kind of engage people and make sure we look for opportunities. We talk about school safety, we talk about bikes, but those come together. Like, I'm not advocating we need to have specific routes to each school, but is there opportunities that, you know, we can address some of the challenges at schools by having safe routes somewhere along the way to the schools, right? We talked about, we don't want parents to drop off their kids in their cars. Well, the option is, you know, is it safe for kids to ride their bikes? So I like, you know, staff to think about that too. And then in terms of time, you know, I want to echo what Councilor Mack said. You know, we got some members of the community like Bev here that's been advocating, you know, trying to promote, you know, safety along Delbrook. So I think we need to act on that. And this, on that point about community engagement, my understanding is that the sidewalk in Peppermint Heights, that idea came 8 years ago. And I get it, you know, priorities change and staff resources are limited, but that's 2 years and we're finally going ahead with it. And I'm happy that we're going ahead with it, but 8 years is a long time.
Yeah. Councillor Pope and then Councillor Forbes.
Thank you. Thanks very much for mentioning those items, Councillor Ma, because I fought hard for the amendment to the budget that ensured there would be funding for active transportation. And that's the reason we have it today, hopefully have it. And I completely agree with you that the council has changed from previous years, Mr. Stewart. And I feel very strongly that this council has shown its support over and over again for active transportation projects. We want them done, we want them funded, and it needs to happen. Yeah, I'm really, really happy to hear about the Mount Seymour Parkway priority. We heard from so many members of the community during the budget process that families with children that did not feel safe on Mount Seymour Parkway. I went and rode it recently and I was scared to death. Honestly, I couldn't wait to get the heck off it. I wouldn't want to see any families or anybody out there. We definitely need a relatively high-speed direct route that links Parkgate with the Second Narrows Bridge, and that's what we heard so much from people who are not using their bike, but want to use their bikes to get to work or to get to other town centers. But they just absolutely have to be safe. So when we're talking about delineators, are we referring to bollards or?
No, the little white posts.
The bollards.
We'd explore whatever options are
Whatever
available.
options.
So we'd start with white bollards. We kind of compare that to what concrete might look like, space is going to come from, but we would explore kind of the different options.
Yeah, because in my opinion, that's not safe enough. I mean, obviously, it's not as safe as the perfect delineated bike lane. But I think we hopefully can do a little bit better with some kind of extra in key places, particularly because Mount Seymour Parkway drivers, when it's not congested, drive really fast and faster than the speed limit. And perhaps that's something else we can look at there is, you know, the traffic slowing down through that zone. Those are my comments. Thanks.
Councillor Forbes.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just an example, like Councillor Laws mentioned how long it's taken. They've been fighting 8 years for a sidewalk and it's coming now. I've been fighting since 2009 when the public strollers were put into the boundary Kirkstone plan. Kirkstone just a little while ago got the one pedestrian activated light, and it was about 4 years ago when Kelly Vaughn was pushing as well. She's in here, isn't she?
Here she is.
Yeah. that we got the 30K across from a park, and I've been arguing for that for years, and yet nobody saying, how can you have a park without a 30K? Especially the design of Kirkstone, the S turn and then the down, cars rip along there. So I appreciate that pedestrian signal went in. I appreciate that 30K is there, but there were supposed to be 4 raised crosswalks on that street because it's a kilometer long from Lynn Valley Road to Mountain Highway. It's also a rat run for people even from Capilano to go down Kirkstone, and all the way Queens, down 29th, down Kirkstone to get on the highway before they get back up, getting on here. So that's like 11, 12 years that Kirkstone has been crying for that. So I would like to see that somehow at least put on your list somewhere, because it's important. The traffic is only increasing on there. The other thing I'd just like to say is I want to ask a question, because a lot of the people that I hear from Upper Lynn, because phase 2 is now being brought in again, and also people who live on Mountain Highway, they want to know why we can't do some of the cycling route not on the busiest arterial roads, because the OCP, I don't recall it saying versus limited non-arterial road options. What I recall it saying is all ages of all abilities should be able to ride in the bike lanes. So I don't think that Mountain Highway is a good spot, because it's very narrow now. There's just not enough room, and we have to buy all the frontage on some of those lots going down on the west side in order to put anything in there. If we're trying to connect it down to Keith and Brooks, they could come up to Adderlyn and then go along there and then come up 20th. And that would be much safer for kids as well. So I just want to ask engineering a question. Are we still thinking about, we'll try to get it as direct as possible, but on those kind of super highway roads, we'll consider a reasonably direct route that's safe for families and children.
Yeah, so I'll hand to Mac in just a second, but in terms of the current engagement process we're doing on both Mountain Highway and Lynn Valley Road Active Transportation, we are exploring, arterial versus side streets as well. So we are exploring both of those options. I'll let Mac provide any additional.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, we look at grade as well. So we do look at alternative routes, and one of the things we consider is grade, and we also look at sort of parking impacts and the space available, because yes, arterial routes are usually often the most direct, but in some cases, for at least parts of that route, there are other alternatives that are, sometimes usable. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm glad you're doing it.
Thank you.
So I think, one of the challenges is that we have one engineering department and we have a lot of things to do. And I think Ms. Chevalier came forward in December, and Mr. Ono has come forward in the past to say engineering is kind of at its peak. We are looking after local areas, we are looking after neighborhoods, we are looking after communities in the district, we are looking after town centers. That town center work is massive. That is digging up all the roads, reorganizing utilities that have been in the ground for 100 years, and some we didn't even know were there. It's a very challenging, it's dealing with culverts, it's dealing with rain, it's dealing with water, it's dealing with all of those massive infrastructures to keep our community safe. And there's only one group of people pulling it all off. And we still are challenged not to have a full complement within the municipality. One of our other challenges is that we have, we are bringing people in, like our new employee, but some of them are not staying for very long. And that is indicative of every municipality in the region and the region. They are moving around, and retaining program employees and keeping them is very challenging. And there's a big learning curve to all of this, and it's a lot to get through. So council really needs to understand that when we are asking for all of this stuff to be pulled off, they can only do so much. And so we're asking them to prioritize, but we also need as a council to prioritize our direction and be willing to say, what is that important piece that we want you guys to focus on right now? Tell us what you can do. Tell us what you have available. And then we have to look at our priority list and say, okay, this is what we want you to fit in
right? From council's perspective, what is important for us and what is important for the community, what we're hearing from the community. I think the other thing that needs to be considered, and I wish I had an engineering group in each, the Seymour, Lynn Valley, and the Capilano, because I think those neighborhoods are very different. You live in Lynn Valley, you know Lynn Valley like the back of your hand, right? Gavin lives in the Seymour. He knows the Seymour like the back of his hand, right? I gotta find somebody in Capilano. Well, you do, but you're not an engineer, sorry. So I gotta find an engineer who lives in Capilano. So I think that's one of the other challenges, is that we really need to understand those areas, and we really need to understand how they work. When we see traffic calming in the district, often we look at what is happening in the city. And years ago, the city just put it, and Mr. Iono will tell me, well, we went through this really big exhaustive consultation, but I don't believe it was that exhaustive. I think council gave direction to look at a speed bump program in the city of North Vancouver, and they put them in. And there was noise for a while. It was in the paper. It was on the front page of the North Shore News, but they've got speed bumps running down 15th, right? And we can't seem to get speed bumps in very many places. And we know they slow people down. We know they speed between bumps, but at least when they get to a bump, they've got to slow down, right? That's what's a little bit challenging, is that we see our next door neighbor is doing it, and we take a long time assessing and saying, no, you know, buses don't like them. Well, the bus drivers are having to go over them down 15th Street, like it or love it, right? You know, when you're running down Grand Boulevard, on one side, on the western side of Grand Boulevard, you've got a very wide bike lane out of one lane, you've got a travel lane, and you've got parking. You have got parking on Grand Boulevard, right? And like, how do we fit all that in? And we can't fit in a bike lane on Mount Seymour Parkway with 4 lanes of bike lane and a sidewalk, right? Like, there's got to be a way to do this. And I don't know if that bar that we set in this municipality is so high that we can't achieve some of this stuff. And then, you know, the other part to that would be, how do you prioritize these things? And I understand, you know, I agree with Councillor Back. If we're going to pave, let's try to, you know, have if there's an obvious way to do something and it makes sense, yes, do it. But then how do you prioritize those other things? And I think that's what we need to understand more of. So Mr. Stewart, you are going to ask the question, and then I think we're going to go to the next section. I just have to get some.
Yeah, I know I'm not supposed to say this, Counselor, but I could give you a hug.
Yes, you're
right
not
now.
supposed to say a lot.
I know. I could give you a hug right now because you just hit the points that I wanted to say. And I think one of the fundamental issues, one of the fundamental issues that we don't and have not resolved in our municipality is, are we focused on commuting cyclers? Are we focused on community cyclers? And I really think we need to arrive at that at some point, because there's only 1% to 2% of commuting cyclers, and that may increase only another percent. Gavin can comment on this, but if we're trying to create a connected cycling community, perhaps we need to focus on community cycling and not just commuter cycling. So, and some people will attack me for that, but I really do believe at this point that in some ways we get hijacked by commuting cycling and not understand the needs for community cycling. And community cycling, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, is more important.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I think the other thing that we need to look at is the seasonality of the use. You know, for commuter cyclists, if you're a commuter cyclist, you're going to commute every day to work. That's what you do. You're just going to use your bike to get to work. But there is a seasonality to the use of some of this infrastructure, and we have to understand, you know, what's happening in specific areas. Like in the Seymour, for instance, most of the cyclists are coming when it's warm on the weekends. Like, there's hundreds of bikes riding at 7 in the morning along the parkway. You know, there's groups of 40, you know, and they're doing their 100-kilometer ride, right? That's their ride for the weekend, right? So, yeah. So, okay, so now we're going to go.
Sorry,
I just want to make another comment if I could.
Okay.
I want to push back a little bit on what Mr. Stewart's saying. I think there's very much crossover between people that are cycling around the community, within the community, people that are commuting. I think that's often, there's a lot of those same routes that are being used for different purposes. And, I think we have to look at the whole network. We're not just catering to one type of cyclist, just like we're not building roads for one type of driver. It is about the whole network. So I don't see them as being separate issues.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel the same. And I also feel like this isn't necessarily within the jurisdiction of the CAO to be commenting on, because unless he's representing the people that we represent, if you have an expert opinion, then that's great. But to say you think it's, should be more about recreational commuters versus, that is so off base.
Okay, I think.
No, Counselor, I have
No.
to respond to that. I have to respond to that. I didn't say either or. I said I needed council direction, not either or. I just need to
Yeah.
understand that there's a dichotomy between the two, and the interests and the needs of the two are somewhat different. If I want to take my child and my family in
Sure,
some
somewhat
cycling
different.
group, it's
Thank you
very
for
different.
clarifying.
It's very different than if I want to commute. And those interests are very, very different. So I really reject both the comments of those two councillors.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. We shared our perspectives. It's a difference between two groups, and it is looking at the type of infrastructure that we can put in, and it's also looking at the seasonality of the use of that, how we prioritize, right? I'm gonna go to the next, I'm gonna go over to the next one so you can fit your question into the next section because it's 20 after 6.
Okay, sorry,
Sorry, Pierre, can we just go back just so we take some takeaways, just right there? Yeah. So council, we're okay with that. I'm just trying to make sure we get some takeaways here. Peter did go through this. These are our quick ideas, potential examples. We heard Parkway, look at that.
Yeah.
Implementation.
Lynn Valley to Lynn Creek, are you still talking about where it comes out on the
City, yeah.
I think I will say to staff, when you are understanding the depth of the discussion that is coming out of these topics, and you've put 3 big topics in for 2 hours, so it's too many. 3 is too many. I could say right now that we're going to just continue talking about these 2 sections and get rid of the last one, but we're on the 3rd one right now. I need a commitment for you to come back again, and not in 6 months, because we want to also talk about the issue of congestion and traffic and what is happening in places like Edgemont, Lynn Valley, up in the headwaters and the canyon and Deep Cove. It is untenable, and we need to have a 2-hour discussion on that. So that needs to be pushed in somewhere, hopefully before the summer break. Because
I would say this hour and 40 so far is very valuable.
it is absolutely valuable, but we could use another hour is what I'm saying, yeah. It's just
If we can get through the 3rd one, I'm sure it'll be the same, and it'll help us take away and set plans this year and next year.
Okay, but I think it's a lot. You guys do this all day long. We get 1 crack at it for 2 hours. And so we're hopefully following everything and understanding it all, but we have a lot of questions. So you have to understand, we do need more of an opportunity to flush out some of these issues and really have the same clarity that you guys have. Okay?
The whole idea is to throw something off the wall. Does it make sense? We'll go and make it more, come back and chill with council. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Next one.
Okay, so Genevieve, we'll jump through a couple of slides there. Okay, so this is our road safety program. Just in the interest of time, I'm probably going to really skim through some of these slides so we can really get into the meat of the discussion. So effectively, what have we been doing in the past? We've been focusing on our locations with high frequency of collisions that have a higher severity of collision as well. So the locations and the examples you'll see on the left, Arborland, Mountain Highway, the Parkway, Main Street. Hopefully, anecdotally, they kind of feel like locations that do see the most amount of traffic and potentially more crash situations. We'll go to the next slide, please.
Yes.
This here is just basically what we're planning to do. So we will still continue to be exploring and also implementing some improvements to our high crash locations. What you see in terms of all the red spots, that's our high crash location. So in terms of prioritizing my staff's time, we've really got to pay attention to those areas in terms of risk managing for the district in terms of specific locations. I won't go into more detail there, but if we jump to the next slide, please. This is kind of the real key area in terms of some current observations and challenges that staff see. So we touched on it at the very start of here, and it's kind of layered its way through in a number of discussion pieces here. We see really two key different areas that relates to road safety as a whole. One, engineering data. Historically, it says X crashes. We should do something about it if it's on the list. But the second piece, which is becoming more and more frequent that we're hearing from the community as well as council discussion, is that a desire to look at traffic calming or some road safety improvements for what could be potentially happening. You know, there might be some speeding, or I feel unsafe in this particular intersection. Can we explore doing something? Right now, based on staffing and based on funding, it's really challenging for us to do both. And we do get a little bit blurred between trying to prioritize staff to fixing known locations, but also starting to look at some locations that just aren't at the top of our priority list. We know that sometimes that type of feedback doesn't sit well with the community, but unfortunately right now we're just managing best with that existing resource. Kind of working through this particular slide, third bullet point there is really talking about traffic calming is really good in certain locations, and in some other locations, driver behavior change and trying to encourage that is also an effective tool as well. So while we get a lot of requests about traffic calming, things like enforcement, which we discussed this evening, and other driver behavior changes is another key tool in our toolbox. We kind of want to explore that a little bit further as it relates to road safety. But ultimately, before we go to the next slide, we see a growing community interest in road safety. And so is it time now, similar to kind of what Mr. Stewart was saying before, for us to really start thinking about expanding this program even more? If we go on to the next slide, really what we're looking at, the top idea that we have here is coming back to that comment I was saying that we have road safety issues in dealing with known locations, but then we also have an interest from the community as it relates to exploring locations that could potentially have some safety issues. We'd like to explore actually severing those two into two distinct programs. We kind of look at it both right now, but from a resourcing and maybe a funding perspective, fully separated out. Road safety, primarily engineering driven. We're doing best practices at known locations and fixing safety problems as best as we can. The second area, which we would probably call something like traffic calming, that program would look at the feedback we get from community and starting to canvass and engaging with the community to saying, okay, we've received some complaints or some input to say, let's just say speed bumps in this particular location, neighborhood, what does this look like? And if there's a certain threshold, that then goes into that program. That is just an idea. It's certainly not a fully baked element, but we see a lot of value in fully separating those two programs, just so that we can keep prioritization of staff on the known locations, but also potentially looking at dedicated resourcing to look at kind of traffic calming at a neighborhood level as well. The second idea here, we've got our current program, pilot, in Edgemoor Village for 30K. We spoke about it just before in terms of, is there an opportunity to explore other slow street corridors as well? We want to take the output of the Edgemoor Village just to see, you know, where would this also work well in our community. In the interest of time, I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Back to council.
I think, and we have talked about different streets before. I know Strathcona would like 30K. I think councillors have a really good idea as to what streets and what they're hearing from local residents in their neighborhoods, where, you know, slow streets are 30K. So I'm saying that Strathcona needs 30K. And I get that it's a, what is it called? A collector? It's a collector. But a collector, like Berkeley is a collector.
If I may add, Strathcona is 30K.
But there's some sections in there that you don't know that it's 30K when you go around those S-turns. So they're classified the same, but very different roads, right? Some collect a number of streets, others collect 3, and they're still called collectors. So they still go under this certain guise of policy. And that's what is the frustrating part about it. I will use an example on Mount Seymour Parkway. So Mount Seymour Parkway, Riverside Drive, is one of the high crash zones in the district. It's awful. If you go 2 blocks down towards Seymour Boulevard at the Superstore on Mount Seymour Parkway, it's not on this list. And you know why? Because there is a Ministry of Transportation warning light that says the light's going to change red. And we have been asking to get one for Riverside Drive for years, to be able to put the same mechanism in, because I used to live down off Riverside Drive, and we always told our kids, you are never ever to turn left on a yellow, ever, because you cannot understand the speed at which the cars are coming down the hill unless you're a very experienced driver and you know how to gun it through an intersection if that car is going too fast. So that is the solution. Like, we know what the solutions are for a lot of these intersections, and yet again, it is that it never happens. It never goes in. We can't do it, right? And I guess that's the frustrating part. I think the other thing that has changed over the years, apart from catchments being changed and cars changing, is the volume of people. The volume of people is untenable. They are rat running around traffic. We are not going to go and sit in the lineup on the cut anymore. We're going to drive through Lynn Valley, and we're going to go down Kirkstone, and then we're going to go down Arborlin, and we're going to rat run anywhere we can to get around the traffic. And it's residents that live in the community, and it's also people that are just trying to get the bridgehead. Like, Mountain Highway is so backed up now into that left-hand turn lane to get onto the bridge. It is, we've moved the problem from Seymour over to Lynn Valley with that left turn, that lane, because it's not long enough. And Mountain Highway can't handle it. You know, for the Seymour, the east-west, it's been a game changer. It really has, except for the lights at the bottom of Keith Road, because you're not sure if you're turning left or going straight, because there's not enough, and I'm still not over that, but we'll fix that. So it is sheer volume. Roads are not safe in the Cove where you are going 20 kilometers because there's so much traffic, but people are doing U-turns in the middle of the road. They're backing up. People are doing U-turns in the middle of Mountain Highway because they just don't want to sit in the traffic anymore, right? It is unreal what people are pulling right now. They're just today, just coming up Lonsdale, there was, you know, the morning traffic at 8:30, I was coming up here. Oh my God. It was bizarre what was happening because people were trying to get to school and they were trying to turn left and they were trying to speed through the intersection. The light kept turning red and everybody was stopped and backed up. So I just think we have to look at the volume of what is coming into our communities and how we deal with some of that. And some of it we can deal with it and a lot of it we can't, but a lot of it we can, and we have to have a discussion about that volume because it is contributing to the safety of our communities. It's also contributing to the livability or the unlivability. You know, this livable Deep Cove, there's nothing livable. There, I will say this again, there is nothing livable about Deep Cove right now. Nothing. There was zero parking in the Cove on the weekend. Umpires could not get to baseball games. They couldn't do their job because they couldn't park. There were people, driveways were blocked. There are no bylaw officers. There's not enough tickets. There were tow trucks that couldn't get down there. People are doing U-turns in the middle of the road. People aren't looking. Like, it's a nightmare. And we are just allowing the throngs of people to come into the community and saying, oh yeah, it's okay, no problem. Like, we've got to deal with this. And there are solutions out there, resident only parking, restricting it. Metro Vancouver is doing all of those pilots right now. They have all the research, they have all the data, they have way more resources than we do. I've asked them to share those policies and those data, that data information with municipalities, and they're going to. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But we have got to deal with this. And the summer season is going to explode. And as soon as that livable Deep Cove opens up and then the suspension bridge, it's just going to be crazy again, and we've got to get a handle on it. Mr. Hansen.
Thank you very much. Topic of road safety, and I found these high crash locations really interesting. Focusing on one that I know well, the Mount Humber Parkway in Berkeley. And it is a high crash location, and I drive it every day. And my belief is that it could be made safer through greater attention to the sight lines and clearing of some bushes.
Yeah.
In the median. And I wonder if
They've done that already
I think more could be done.
Yeah.
I think more could be done. And same thing to some degree, and I share Councillor Mary's comment about the light indicating a light change at Riverside and Mount Humber Parkway, but I've actually dealt with car accidents on that intersection that involve different issues, again involving sight lines and driver perception is something that I would highlight in terms of how accidents happen. And I think it's possible perhaps we could go through each of these high crash locations with the perspective of how do drivers perceive these locations and what are the errors in their perceptions. How are things like bushes, signage, lines on the road? There may be other things that we can think of to improve driver caution through these intersections. So I just wonder what your comments on that are.
I'll pass to Steve in just a second, but just in terms of, when we do identify our locations, we go in and do a review, we review ICBC data to understand how do these crashes even happen from a data perspective. That may not necessarily talk about perception, but at least it tells you how do the cars collide, as an example. But then we do go actually to the location, review it, figuring out, okay, from an engineering perspective, sight line, edge trimming lights as well. We'll take that comment back in terms of in the pathway. We can share that back with staff in terms of having another look. But is there anything else you wanted to add there, Steve?
Yes, quick update on Mount Sewell Riverside. So the good news is that we are planning to construct the advanced warning flasher, is what we call it. This year, we had started the process several years ago, but
27 years, but I'll take it.
there were some design complications, budget implications, delayed the project. The design is nearing completion right now, and it's going to be tendered shortly, and it's going to be built. So we do recognize that that is really that's the solution, and largely it's because of the speeds of Mount Seymour Parkway and the curvature of the road. But rest assured that that's coming. So I apologize for the delay, but it is on the way. We will have a close look at Berkeley and Mount Seymour Parkway, and we have an annual program where we trim vegetation. It's an ongoing effort, and so anything that is constraining sightlines, we'll be sure to.
I did request that last year, and it is the foliage that is in the medians grows there's called spireas, and they grow very fast. And because the road curves, like try making a left-hand turn, I dare you. Don't try it. Try making a left-hand turn out of Browning. Is heading eastbound along Mount Seymour Parkway. It's an uncontrolled intersection. It's right after Berkeley, and just try turning left there. See, you've got Mount Seymour Parkway, which is gaining elevation. You've got a curve to the road. You've got trees and bushes, and you've got some low sports cars that you cannot even see, and they're ripping up the parkway. And you're having to cross 2 lanes and turn into a holding lane and sit there and wait. It's very dangerous. So I think it's the design of some of these roads, and
Just talk about one.
and that leads to the challenge. No, go ahead.
I can just talk about one other intersection, then I'll rest. It's in an area I know very well, Mount Seymour Parkway and Deep Cove Road. And this comes back to the comment, I think about the design or that. People have raised that intersection with me from a pedestrian point of view, but I was down there during the election campaign in October, door knocking in the area. It's a very hazardous intersection from the perspective of pedestrians, again, in terms of sight lines, in terms of driver expectation as they approach the intersection. Perhaps the timing of the light plays a role, I don't know, but talk about making a left turn from Browning, try crossing Mount Seymour.
There's no sidewalk there.
At Deep Cove Road, as the traffic approaches in all the different directions, making their left turns on the yellows and so forth. So I wonder what comments you have about that and how that could be made safer for the community, because it is, from a pedestrian point of view, it's necessary for them if they're walking across that path.
Yeah, I don't have specifics as it relates to that particular intersection. I don't know if you guys do just here, but we can take away.
If I could just comment, I think a theme here is emerging for me, and it's Mount Seymour Parkway, and there's obviously some opportunities for improvement, cycling comfort and safety. And I think what we'll do is we're going to go away and we're going to really look at this. Perhaps we can come back with a report that has some recommendations, observations, and stuff that requires immediate attention, like vegetation that's overgrown. We'll get on that right away and get that back, and then again come back with some recommendations related to possible changes that we could make to improve safety.
Deep Cove Road on the west side of Deep Cove Road in Mount Seymour Parkway, there's no sidewalks. The houses sit right on the curb. The property lines are close to the curb, and there's no space in there. So you're walking along by the Raven, and then you walk towards the gas station, which is a driveway, and then you have to cross one side and then another side to even get up to the service road, because there's no real sidewalk at that intersection. Councillor Pope.
I just want to say that I support the idea of splitting the policy. It's obviously there's 2 different streams, and And I think it makes a lot of sense to be doing it that way. I was interested in an earlier comment that was made about the we can't do it all, and I wondered, do we need more engineers? Is that the problem with getting stuff done?
So just to, well, resourcing is always part of the equation in terms of how quickly we can get things done, engagement, approvals, design, that's also other parts of the equation as well. Just to give council an indication, our whole, that very first slide in terms of the 4 different streams, that is the transportation portfolio, that's about a dozen staff in total. So about hundreds of the district, about a dozen are purely within kind of the transportation team. We have some delivery specialists. So it is a relatively small team delivering a fairly broad,
Large amount of work.
fairly large amount of, so capacity for staff is a problem.
Do we have, are we actively hiring?
Yeah, it's just hard to find. Gavin?
Well, sort of just directly that question, we spend a great deal, I do anyway, a big part of the week on hiring and going through interviews. But we're a mid-sized municipality. And so I think it was mentioned earlier on, you see the same faces. So if you come back next week to the utilities, I'm here. You know, we're talking about transportation now, so we have the same engineers, but they're multiple. It's one of the great things about this job, actually. It's varied, you know, it's utilities, it's transportation, it's parks. You're dealing with the same group of people, but it's a really ambitious agenda given the size we're a mid-sized municipality. So a bigger municipality has a lot more staff, the same issues. We don't have any less issues, but we're just mid-sized. So, and we're growing and we're dealing with a lot of regional things. We haven't touched on it tonight. A lot of things we're talking about are on the weekend traffic, the tourism, the people who come to the North Shore to recreate. That's the Cove every weekend or a sunny day. That come here to play and to recreate, not just our citizens. So yes, we're actively looking at staff and hiring because we have issues with retirement, obviously, but we're also a mid-sized municipality, which comes with a lot of challenges.
When do we have an opportunity just in our calendar to begin that to have that conversation in regards to that volume, that traffic that is being driven by tourism? You know, that number is just going up and up and up. And because the climate is changing, we're having, like last year, we had a longer fall winter. We had no idea that it's going to be a sunny May long weekend. Like, when has that happened? That hasn't happened in decades. And you know, all of this is starting earlier. Like, I'll just give you an example in the Cove. You know, residents are saying to me, well, you know, there's no parking anywhere. Like, and it's, you know why? Because our agreement with the school district doesn't start for another month. And yet, after the May long weekend, and yet the weather's changed. So those agreements, we need to talk about this to the school district, saying, we gotta open these lots way earlier to be able to absorb this traffic, but we can't really absorb it anymore. And, you know, we're trying to get people to use active transportation and travel different ways, but there's still a huge number of vehicles coming in. For all the people that are getting on a bike or catching the bus, there's still a huge number of vehicles coming into the area, and we cannot sustain it. Gavin.
So again, Mr. Stewart mentioned it and Peter's mentioned it. We're here tonight to say, we need your help as much as anything else. And we need some really big decisions. So if we came to you and said, we're done with the Cove. I've done everything I can in the last 5 years to try to RPO, parking, schools, but it's full at 9 o'clock in the morning. So we shut it down at the Parkway. Go home.
Yeah.
Turn around, go home. You're not coming in. That's it. That's happening in Belcarra. That's happening in other parts.
It's happening at Bunsen Lake.
We need that. We need help. We need that decision here to make that case for the residents if that's what we're going to do, because there's no way both can take any more traffic at that.
Mr. Stewart, and then Genevieve, you're going to tell me when there's a date to have that conversation.
Yeah,
Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, Gavin's made my comments. We just need to be much more aggressive in terms of how we're going to do demand management. And I won't ask the staff to comment on this, but the cost of actually changing road and curbs and sidewalk is like crazy expensive. We can do system and process changes that would be much cheaper and help us manage some of the demands that we have. The idea of just building more infrastructure to accommodate all these folks, we can't do. We just can't do it anymore. And so we need to say, is Deep Cove local or is it regional? And if it's local, then let's make the choices and make it local and move on.
Okay, we're gonna have our last comment from Councillor Forbes, and then we're gonna just go to our residents here, and then it's 1:45, and we want 5 minutes before we go into the next meeting, so I have a quick question.
I'm in favor of what you just mentioned, Gavin.
Okay, there we go.
I think we should not let any more in once it gets too full.
Yeah, I think we have to understand a lot of the the tourist destinations that we have, like, and the way people are coming, like I've always said over the years, like not everybody can come at 2 on a Saturday. Right? You can't all come at the same time. We gotta spread it out, right? And that's gonna take some, looking at how we do things differently. We have to spread out the love of all these places. Metro Vancouver is working with the District of West Vancouver and the provincial park system to sort of spread some people out across the North Shore, because we're just the closest one off the ridge, and a lot of people come over here because it's most convenient. But there's infrastructure that West Vancouver has, for instance, like Cypress Mountain, and people can go there. It's just a little bit farther for them to drive, so that's why they don't, right? So it's very challenging. We're gonna have to have a good discussion. So Genevieve is gonna find that date. We've got Elizabeth McClenahan is on our list of the speakers list. So we've got, you can do it in 2 minutes. I appreciate that. Okay.
Elizabeth McClenahan of Edgemont, also on the Community Association. And I'm speaking on behalf of a number of neighbors. I applaud the fact that we now have 30 kilometers an hour through Edgemont Village. However, I live on Newmarket Drive, and historically, for the past 23 years, anybody who encounters any congestion on Edgemont boots over to Newmarket, because there's not one stoplight, one stop sign. There's no impediment to go from Crescent View to almost to the Fell Street overpass. And we're talking, now we have Dudley Park, which has been all tarted up and very beautifully attractive to people who drive from all over the Lower Mainland to this parklet. So we have the kids from the daycare walking down. Newmarket, Crescent View are extremely popular for people walking their dogs, such as ourselves, elderly people such as myself, as seniors, because it's flat, it's close to the village. You can do a walk around, and then you can go for a coffee at Delaney. If we're going to have 30 kilometers through the village on Edgemont, we have to make the arterial roads. Newmarket, possibly Crescent View, although most people aren't, and that's got another bottleneck, which if I have a second, I'll talk about. Colwood and Woodbine have stop signs and of course, but still, I think we have to make that whole area. As if we're gonna do a pilot, let's do it. Of course, all these things are great, but if you don't have bylaw enforcement, then it's all just crap. So that is a request. I know on Newmarket, one of my neighbors, his dog got hit and is now a 3-legged Lucy. The neighbor on the way across the street from us, daughter just about got hit by somebody just, booting down. Now, there are a few of those speeders who are actually neighbors, but, and we do the whole slow down thing, but it's ongoing, and I know you've done studies and assessments. Related to that, the finishing of the Connaught residence condo, they now have 1 hour parking in front of it, and it's creating a bottleneck. I know that Karen Saunders communicated with engineering, but it's a bottleneck from all points. We have the, is that my ding dong? Okay, I'll send it an email, but that particular bottleneck at Newmarket and Crescent View is just a disaster waiting to happen. So, and I think Catherine got a chance. And I'll touch on the others in an email about working of employees, and
Send that in. Thanks, Elizabeth. Anybody else? Okay, Elise.
Just very briefly,
I'm with the Edgemont Community Association, and I just like to thank everybody here. It's a tough job that you're up against in general. And I think the only solution to this automobile cycling situation is if we go to the manufacturers of automobiles and tell them they can't make the speedometers go over 30 miles per hour. That might help a lot rather than 120 down Mount Seymour Parkway or something. But I do believe that with the increased excitement about furthering the cycle network, that there should be checks and balances put in place. And that is a training situation for those people that are cycling with traffic on the lanes, that they should know the basic rules, because I see them missing all the time. From through Edgemont Village, they fly through on a red light. So there's an education process there that's missing. The second thing is an insurance. If there was a very minimum insurance of say $10 a year, that could go towards registering the cycle. That if it was stolen, there'd be a trace back. So there's a lot of advantages to that. You could also monitor how many people are actually either recreational or commuter. So I think there is mechanisms and there's room for improvement in there. Because right now there is a conflict. The cyclists aren't any better drivers than the drivers. And I'm saying that only because most of the cyclists all have 2 or 3 vehicles anyway. They certainly do in my street. And so that's my 2 cents for tonight.
So thank you, John.
Hi, I'm not representing any particular group, but I did want to relate an anecdote. No one's talked about this today, but earlier this afternoon, I was driving my car up Paisley to Bridgewood, and I was passed by a cyclist on the right-hand side, going uphill, and he didn't have a helmet. It's the first time it's ever happened, but it's going to happen again. You have bicycles out there now that can go 30 kilometers an hour. You've got scooters that can go 20. You haven't even talked about that. But if you start allowing cyclists priority, they're going to start speeding, and you're going to have more accidents. As far as I'm concerned, you don't need any more cycles through Edgemont Village. No more cyclists. If they want to, no more cycle paths. If they want to travel the road, let them go on the road. They can keep up with traffic now. You're going to see a lot more electric cycles. And a lot of people don't pay any attention, including the people that are on these little electric scooters as well. You're on the horns of a dilemma here, and you accommodate it. You have to say no more priorities for bicycles.
Thanks, John. It is a good point about, and I know that Metro Vancouver and the Parks Committee is having discussions about, are we going to go back to segregated park trails because there's too many, there's too many collisions, and we've had those issues throughout the region. All municipalities are dealing with these challenges. On the one hand, you can say that cyclists don't love the electric car because the car is so quiet. And so when you're riding in a lane that may not be separated, you can't hear the electric car coming. But then, an electric bike in a regular bike lane, how do you manage that, especially if the lane's narrower, right? So there are challenges behind some of this, and it's something that we need to talk about as we go forward. How are you going to look at the policies? And I would say again, I hope that we are looking at Metro Vancouver's policies on some of these things, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. And I think it's better if we're looking at synergistic rules throughout the region when we implement these kinds of pieces of infrastructure and facilities in our own municipalities, that they're conducive to their neighbors, right? And certainly greenways projects are running through industrial areas, through parkland, through streets, and there needs to be some consistent approach. So okay, I think we've had a really good discussion, but I do really want us to focus on, I don't think anybody else, no. Oh, sorry, Lyle, do you have 1 minute? 1 minute, really quick, because we got to get into the next meeting.
Part 1 of tonight's presentation talked about the Upper Lynn Elementary School catchment area being the area that got the greatest number of all the school areas covered in the district that people raised issues concerning. This is my home turf. I know it well, lived there for 30 years. And frankly, I think that Linda's actually got one of the safest setups. Except of course, when you have things like on Saturday, when we had Bear crossing the road at Hillman Park.
Okay.
There you go. I'd like to know more about this. How do I find out?
You can send an email into council asking those questions and mayor and council and staff will respond.
Very good.
Thank you, Lyle. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the presentations. We're having that next meeting, Genevieve, about volume.
We'll work on when the next available date is.
Really soon though, because we've got some issues that we've got to deal with. We need to understand the enforcement issue. We need to understand the volume issue and what we're gonna deal with. It's only gonna get worse. Thank you, everyone. This is adjourned. Oh, Jim, motion, Catherine seconded. You should-
Yeah, we have.